Welcome to the 12th station. This is Jim Maughan, and I'm with my good friend, Mr. Bug Hall.
Hey guys,
How you doing there, Mr. Bug?
I'm doing good. Doing very
Good.
good. How you doing?
Good. I'm doing well. This is going to be an interesting show, guys. You know, one of the things we talked about last show was sort of prolonged adolescence in males, and a big part of that is the entertainment industry. And just to frame it up, here's what I would say. Uh, since we effectively have thrown out God in society, certainly a God that makes demands of us, we're susceptible to all sorts of things. And we've become a society that is pretty much addicted to pleasure. Part of that is things that entertain us. We can spend $10 a month and get all the Netflix we want, Amazon Prime, YouTube is an endless source. And one of the things I've noticed, which has really been very, very fascinating to me because I was fortunate enough as a child to have very good male role models, namely my father, grandfather, and others, who pointed out what was happening with the television industry, with movies. Just something to think about, Bug. And I may be off a year or two, but in 1965, the winner for Best Picture was The Sound of Music. In 1966, I believe it was A Man for All Seasons. In 1969, it was Midnight Cowboy. Now, that's pretty telling. The story of a prostitute in Times Square, a male prostitute in Times Square. The point is, and I remember that we had very rigid standards in our home growing up, and my parents were watching these sitcoms very closely. And the first one was the Norman Lear All in the Family, where the conservative guy was made to look like a buffoon. The Carol O'Connor Archie Bunker thing. And people didn't realize that. I mentioned that a couple of media classes in college. They're like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "What are you kidding me?" It was obvious. And they kind of go right down the line and look where we are today. And it's been incremental. And Bug, here's the thing: you had a front row seat to all of this. I can't think of anyone better to discuss this issue. I mean, you started out, for those of you I'm sure, presumably you know who Mr. Bug Hall is, but Bug Hall started in Hollywood at 8 years old. And starred in the remake of the Spielberg remake, I believe, of The Little Rascals, and as Alfalfa. And from then, if you look him up, his filmography is very, very long and detailed. Not to mention you've been on the production side. So fair to say, you're an expert. So if you could maybe start out, give us an overview.
First of all, I'd point out that I do have a lot of experience in the industry. It was my job for 30 years. Sure. I knew pretty much every executive, every head of every studio on some level, right? And one of the things I'll point out, which I didn't take note of until into my conversion, was that pretty much every major executive that you're going to have any dealings with, every major studio head, network head, I'm going to use slightly veiled language for the platforms we're on. They all are living the lifestyle of the sins that cried to heaven for justice. Those particular sins of a disordered attraction, a nature of, oh, sorry, that's my Angelus alarm. Right, those particular sins that cry to heaven for justice, unnatural attractions. I'm sure those at home know what I'm talking about. Every single one of them, right? Or the very rare occasion, it's a barren woman who has no interest in family, right? Those are the two people you're dealing with on the executive level. So do they have an intention of altering the culture in their own image? And I mean, we all do to a certain degree, right? What you value is what you promote.
Sure.
So even if there's not a deeper evil behind it, right? So like St. Padre Pio said that the devil is entering homes through the TV, and was a strong proponent of getting rid of it completely. Now, if you don't want to supernaturalize the problem, it's enough to naturalize it. Because
great point, because it's obvious.
The reality is what we value is what we try to create. You can't do otherwise, by the way. So even if a writer, for instance, isn't classically trained and doesn't understand that every movie is a value system, is a proof of a particular value system, his value system naturally becomes the value system of the film, right?
Yes.
So my main job for the last 10 years as a development executive was story theory. I worked very hard on character arcs and story arcs. You cannot tell a story without promoting some value. That is what a character is. A character is a vessel through which a particular value is won or lost. And that's just one aspect of it, right? The other aspect of it is the individual characteristics of the characters promote an image, what's the word? A normalization of characteristics in the real world. So you touched on this, I think, really well. The idea that fathers, the idea that men in general have become buffoons, have become something, something less than what they once were. That's been normalized in media, which then tells all the young men watching that this is acceptable. This is all I should be aiming for, because this is what a man is. A man is a defective woman, and hear her roar, and I'm just supposed to have my man cave and participate in the rearing of children or the direction of society.
That's a great Helen Reddy reference, by the way, Bud. Very, very nice.
Yep. So that's another part of the problem. And then there's the even more naturalized aspect of it, which is simply that simple base pleasures like tuning out and watching TV are just contrary to virtue. What? Wow. And this is something that's really hard to talk about, right? Because people get up in arms and they say, well, I like tuning out, and what if that's just my version of eutropalia? Okay, but is it rightly ordered? Is your eutropalia rightly ordered? Are you ingesting 30 minutes a day, or are you realistically binge watching 5 episodes of a TV show at night, right?
Please forgive the interruption. Have you seen the stock market this last week? Many are losing sleep over their vulnerability with current markets, inflation, and the insane current monetary and fiscal policies. Our sponsor, St. Joseph Partners, is in the business of helping you own physical precious metals to protect your wealth. What about protecting your wealth in, say, retirement plans? If you've considered gold IRAs before, you may have been surprised at the standard costs. After all, we are dealing with real assets as opposed to digits on your screen. St. Joseph Partners is offering free setup to 12-station customers. We waive that cost completely and are offering free first-year admin fees. We serve more than the retirement market as well. Perhaps you may have wanted to add some gold to, or begin diversifying or add to your position. We will step you through the process and make it easy. We don't sell high premium collector coins that bury investors like the firms you see advertised on mainstream media. We sell bullion, served close to spot, sold close to spot, and that will begin benefiting as gold moves higher. Lastly, if you know any friends or family members who are in the market for metals, send them our way. We'll send you a gift of some precious metals for the referral to thank you. Nothing has protected wealth like gold over the centuries, weathering every storm imaginable. The timing seems urgent to be sure to be properly diversified. If your financial advisor talks you out of physical metals, get him and us on the phone together. We think you'll learn a lot, and just to see how superficial, if not negligent, the arguments are from the financial advisors who chronically fail to allocate clients to gold and other precious metals. Anyway, St. Joseph Partners, that's www.stjosephpartners.com or 610-326-2000. Now back to our show.
These are important questions to ask.
Yes.
And, it's this is a tough one. I think this is the largest pushback that I get, which I find ironic because I really am very qualified to speak to this issue. I think more than most people.
And for those of you who don't believe it, look up Bug's biography. I mean, when I first met you, I looked it up, and it's very comprehensive. I mean, it's just big. You just keep going.
Well, so when I retired, I self-canceled. I did that for moral reasons. I did that because I decided that heaven was the only goal, and this was an infringement on that. Right? When I retired, I had just finished writing, producing, and acting in a movie with Selena Gomez, which sold months after my retirement. I had just sold a show to Netflix that I created, wrote, and produced. So I definitely have the experience here to look at the culture of Hollywood and
Absolutely.
to see what it is that Hollywood is promoting.
Can I frame something up when you give me a second?
Yeah, jump in.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Hey, Maughan, I just thought of this. I thought it was very interesting. I've spoken to Cherie Ballinger, an executive producer of a couple of movies. I spoke to a couple of people. One of the things I've noticed most pronounced, and at the beginning of the show, I brought it up with the movies. Hollywood produced tremendous high quality content, right? I would say in the 1940s, I'm a big movie fan. I mean, the 1940s, particularly the 1950s, and even part of the 1960s. There's some tremendous works that came out of Hollywood, and I think that they talked about, even on a secular level, virtue. They talked about virtue, even in the underlying, if it wasn't overtly religious. And by the way, worth noting, there were some tremendous Catholic-themed religious movies. I'm thinking of The Cardinal. I'm thinking of, Going My Way. All sorts of things. The Bells of St. Mary. Some of these things were fantastic. Bernadette of Lourdes. The movie was tremendous, right? These are really powerful films. Just a real side note. That was one film where at the end of it, Bernadette's going off to the convent, and who was waiting behind for her, waving her goodbye, telling her that he would never marry, was a young man. I mean, that's masculine love.
Yeah.
I love you so much. I will never. Powerful stuff.
That story touches on what you were actually talking about, either the last episode or the one before, the idea that we've now been taught that God just wants us to be happy.
Yes.
Right? There's a beautiful line in that where the Blessed Mother tells Bernadette, I don't have happiness to offer you in this life.
That's right.
Right? That is not what you're called to in this life.
Wow, was that powerful? Yep.
It's such a beautiful statement.
Yes,
right?
it is.
The idea that embracing God's calling for us is not always going to make us appetitively happy, but by choosing that ardor, we will grow into something that we can't even foresee by our own natural reason. We will grow into something that is a representation of true joy.
Yes.
Right? We will become a saint.
Could I finish this up and then you comment? Because there's one more thing I wanted to say. I was almost done. Here it is. What I've noticed is like there was that period of time where this was absolutely, and my mother, God rest her soul and bless her for this, she introduced this to me. She introduced Angels with Dirty Faces, some of these movies, and Bernadette of Lourdes, and because they used to come on in New York City on Channel 9, and they were usually in the afternoon, and no one else was watching them, and it was such a gift from my mother. And here it is. I noticed that if you want to use Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, right, but the hero's journey, simply put, is the hero goes out on a very noble quest, runs into horrendously difficult times, makes it through, comes back to where he started as a changed person with presumably virtue, right? Real, honest to God virtue. And I think, Bug, and I would leave it here, and if you maybe pick this up a little bit, none of that's going on. None of it. Quite the opposite. Instead, what we see today, and we could quote chapter and verse, and again, you know better than I do. What we see today is horrendous movies, steeped in self-absorption, egocentrism, and frankly, perverse sexuality.
Right. Okay. So there's actually a clinically deducible reason for all of this.
Okay.
Right? And we don't need to get into specific intentions of individual executives or the cabal of cohorts in Hollywood. We can skip all of that and still figure out how we got here, right? And the simple word that you need to learn and put it in your pocket and know it well is deconstructionism. So this is an idea that was really presented during the Enlightenment. It was brought about during the age of so-called Enlightenment. The idea that classical values, traditional values, are social constructs. And what we need to do is deconstruct those and rebuild from there new values, rebuild something else entirely, right? So Hollywood has hit a phase. There's two reasons we got here. One, classical education is gone. So all the people funneling into Hollywood, who, by the way, Hollywood does tend to draw a certain egocentric, selfish type of person. It's just par for the course that is typically who is drawn to Hollywood. people who think that what will be provided for them is an easier life, a more exciting life, a life really centered on their own pleasures, right?
Okay.
Now those people show up and they're not classically trained. They're total experientialists, meaning they think that a good writer doesn't need to know anything about story theory, doesn't need to understand how a presentation of value systems works in a story. And all they need to do is emote. They just need to sit down and emote.
Wow, that's powerful what you just said. Go ahead, man.
Now, as a development executive, this was the hardest part of my job, because even at the Oscar-winning level, writers are no longer classically trained. And what a lot of people don't realize is, in the old days, writers were these triple threats. They wrote their own work, they edited their own work, and what they presented to the studio was a finished, polished script with a moral message that knocked it home, right? Studio executives and development executives are now way bigger in Hollywood than they ever were. The reason for that is these writers can no longer accomplish the job of presenting a story with any meaning, right? Not any coherent meaning. So my job was to take writers that were even at the highest levels and round their work out, teach them how to structure it so that some sort of message is being promoted. The good thing about that position, which is why I started the company with my friends, was that we were now in control of steering what that message was going to be. I eventually quit because I realized there's too much against even the most devout moralists in Hollywood. There's too much of the infrastructure that is contrary and will fight against you, and you ultimately don't have the control that you hope that you would have. So that's problem number one, the experientialism of these writers. Problem number two is nature abhors a vacuum. All right, so they think they're deconstructing everything. They think they're just going to, rip it down, and a good story doesn't even need to have a message. The problem is that's never the case. What happens is you get these propaganda pieces, these movies that are now promoting whatever flavor of the week value these writers and executives and all the various people in Hollywood, what they want to promote.
And doesn't it bug? This is a question. Those values, the flavor of the week, as you eloquently called it, and accurately, those are put up by literally a wet finger to the wind. Okay, yeah. What's good? What's good that with no thought whatsoever. And I loved what you said earlier, and I just want to highlight this about classically educated people coming to Hollywood, meaning the purpose of education, a classical, call it liberal arts education, was to form one in how to think correctly. Fair enough?
Yeah.
Right. And none of that's happening. And that's why what we were saying was really so eloquent, because they get there and they emote. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's again, I hope I didn't throw you off. I just thought
you're spot on. That's the crux of the issue. And so since they don't understand story structure, they have no classical training, they've never read anything classically, right? What happens is movies have gone from a certain level of virtue, right? The idea that there was an order to them.
Yes.
They were ordered. You could watch a movie without disordering your own soul. Now, movies are predominantly emotive, right? Even the actors that win Best Actor now are very rarely ever quote unquote classical actors who are ordered in their approach. They're just emoters. This is the I forget the method they call this one, where you just enter into the emotions of the character and just let it all fly, right? It's DiCaprio in that Frontier movie where the whole movie is him just going, and he looks
when the bear tore him up, that one. When the bear tore him up, that one.
Right. By the way, a brilliant performance in the sense that he actually did suffer. It was a self-imposed suffering, right? But he actually did suffer through that filming because he genuinely was putting himself in the position of the character.
Yeah.
Whereas classical actors, this is a great story. Dustin Hoffman, who's part of the new school of acting, versus Sidney Poitier, right?
Yes.
Sidney Poitier is about to go into this scene with Dustin Hoffman, and Dustin Hoffman's jumping up and down, working himself into a sweat and huffing and puffing and huffing and puffing. And Sidney Poitier's composed. He's standing there like this, waiting for them to call action. And he finally can't take it anymore. And he turns to Dustin Hoffman and says, "What are you doing?" And Dustin Hoffman says, "Well, I'm supposed to be out of breath at the start of this scene, and I'm getting ready for the scene." And Sidney Poitier says, "Why don't you try acting?"
Ouch.
And that's the point, right? The point is everything is emotive now. You aren't pretending. You are being, right? So the whole business has become disordered.
That's, if I could, but just to offer context, you just nailed it. It's disordered. If we're subjugating ourselves to the whims of our emotions are to be mastered, not to be enslaved by.
And so here's the problem. The problem is, even if you find movies for your kids or shows for your kids that are not intrinsically evil in the presentation of ideology, or not intrinsically evil in the characterization of individual characters throughout the movie or show, they are still predominantly designed to influence the emotions first and foremost, instead of engaging with the intellect, instead of engaging primarily with our human ability to reason, right?
Yes.
This is a problem that people can't spot. It's a problem that is pernicious. It's a problem that, as Catholics who really want to be able to give our kids at least some taste of the things that we loved growing up, right? The idea of sitting down and having a movie night with mom and dad and your siblings and making the popcorn, those are intrinsic goods. The problem is, it's nearly impossible to find anything in the culture today that presents that good without some aspect of evil. And I'm not just talking about the content itself. It's the disorder of the passions. I'll tell you a personal story that I think represents this well. So being very versed in story theory, I went through and I made a list with my daughter for my daughter of sort of the first movies that I wanted to sit and watch with her, right? And I was very meticulous about making sure that these things had intrinsically good messages and that there was no disordered characterization. But I hadn't quite realized the emotional aspect yet. I hadn't come to that conclusion. And the very first thing that we watched, I think my daughter was a little over a year. I waited until then. We sat down and we watched this movie, and I explained all the moral messages to her along the way, and we had a great time. And that became sort of a weekly routine for us to do that. Over the course of about a year, I thought she was going through a typical, the typical terrible twos sort of phase where the emotions start to become difficult to manage, right? And, I was very mildly concerned because people kept saying to me, "Oh, this is a normal phase for toddlers. This is normally what toddlers go through." And I thought, okay, well, that makes sense. That's what everyone says. One day, I noticed the direct correlation between her emotions being harder to manage after watching what I thought was very well-ordered movies that I would promote to any good Catholic because they have good messages and good characters in them, right? And so I thought I'd try an experiment. Which, by the way, we never had a TV in our house from the time we got married. But we would watch things on the laptop, or we would watch things on our phone. And actually, I take that back. We did have it kept in the closet, and we would take it out, a little one, and we put it on the coffee table and watch there sometimes, and then put it away afterwards. Well, I wanted to do an experiment, so I said, you know what? I'm cutting all media for, let's say, a month or two. Let's just see what happens. The difference in my daughter was almost immediate. Within a week or two, she had, even at 2 years old, no problems controlling her emotions. She did not have any meltdowns that we would typically consider to be normal 2-year-old toddler types of meltdowns that we as a culture just accept as a normal part of parenting. Those were gone. Just gone.
Really?
Yep. And it just clicked with me. Why? There's something deeper than just the moral message of the movie and the characterization. there's another problem here that I think people are missing. And as I did some introspection and some deeper thought on it, I realized it's the problem of emoting. It's the problem of the story itself engaging directly with the emotions instead of the intellect.
Wow. Bug, I was wondering, maybe for the folks at home, and I apologize, I didn't give you this ahead of time. Can you think of any that you watched with your daughter? Ones that you would highly recommend, or if you want to save that for solutions?
Yeah, I don't want to get into specifics there because I'd rather not point to specific projects.
Okay, sure. Yeah, fair enough, man.
The reality is, like, as a parent, you can do this exercise on your own. You can watch a movie with your kids, and you can, if you're watching with that eye, if you're watching specifically, not just for the moral message, because by the way, you should have determined that before you sat down with your kids to watch it anyway, right? And not just the characterization. Are there bratty characters that don't get proper comeuppance, whatever. Now that you've solved those two things and you've decided it's morally good, sit down and watch it from the perspective of, does this primarily engage my emotions, or does this predominantly engage my intellect? You'll know the difference. If you're watching for that, you'll spot it. You'll see it in a second, and you'll go, wow, how did I ever miss this? Wow. It's actually not hard to do. If you're trying to spot that, you'll spot it.
Wow. Yeah. Now I got it. So moving along, as a guy who has been in Hollywood, could you comment a little bit, particularly on just the overall opiate effect that entertainment has? Because I think that's very real, and it's very pernicious, and we see it everywhere.
Well, there's a couple things that I think the entertainment industry is designed to do, right? It's the old bread and circus.
Sure.
We use that phrase a lot here. When you have
yes, we do.
When you have big sister running your life, right? The Oedipal mother of government. She wants you satiated with easy pleasures so that you do not stand up and determine for yourself what a life well lived is. Because if you take the time to try and determine what a life well lived is, you will determine that it is not anything like the typical widget-based society, the utilitarianism that we're currently living under. And you will probably make a decision to live a radically different life. And the bottom line is, Big Sister doesn't want that. So they give you bread and circus. Now, here's the thing. There's two things that happen, in my opinion, with entertainment. On the one side, it's escapism.
Yes.
Right? Video games, you see this a lot with the alternate life video games, right? Which I loved when I was a video game addict, right? I loved the games where you just wander around a made-up universe, collecting things and building a character in your own image, or a made-up image of yourself. It's just escapism, right? Movies and TV do the same thing. It's why we get hooked on binge watching these big alternate universe, these world building type shows, right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
And it's why the new Lord of the Rings show is gonna be a smash hit, because it's going to be a total escapist show built in a fictional universe. They're going to use the bones of what Tolkien built and then expand it out from there into this sprawling universe that you can lose yourself in, so that you don't have to think about the real world, where you live today. That's problem number one. And by the way, that can happen with books too. I've heard cases of families whose kids had become disillusioned because of the
Harry Potter.
Yeah, and they use stories as an escape. Stories are not meant to be an escape for us. They're meant to be educational.
Yes.
Not only educational in the we sometimes look at, let's say, more conservative storytellers, and they lose a certain whimsy, a certain magicalness in storytelling, right? Because they're too educational. I mean, educational to the character of a man, right? They are meant to present to us character building exercises, right?
Yes.
So that we can contend with certain things in a safe place, right? That's what stories are for. They teach you that there is darkness in the world, but that it can be overcome, and that there is such a thing as vice and virtue, good and evil. You get a chance when you're young to contend with those realities in the safety of your own home, with your mother and your father, with the family unit there present, so that you can then take what's learned abstractly and apply it in the real world. That is the purpose of storytelling. That's what our Lord did when he told parables. He taught almost exclusively in parables, right?
Yes.
So
Wow.
that's problem number one. Stories should not be escapism.
It's that time.
It's that time. I want to touch on just one more point, though, which is the second problem with stories. So you've got escapism, which just teaches you to zone out and not engage with your own life, right? To not tackle reality and order the chaos around you. The second problem is propaganda. Once they deconstruct value systems from stories, they then, because nature abhors a vacuum, they then become propaganda pieces. And here's the irony is we all spot it, even when we don't want to. It's the old, the Ghostbusters remake that nobody wanted to replace with the females and make it a propaganda piece and try and present it as a creatively driven story. And the reality is it wasn't. It was a propaganda piece. And then they couldn't understand why nobody wanted it, and they had to call us all white supremacists because we didn't want to replace Bill Murray with, some Saturday Night Live.
Whoever.
Feminist, right?
I don't even remember. Oh,
right.
gosh.
So
that was go ahead.
So that's the thing, right? You satiate them with cheap pleasure while propagandizing them at the same time. So it's a two-front assault on society and particularly on masculinity.
Well, so I got to tell you, honestly, brilliant analysis. I think you absolutely nailed it. You made me think of it in ways I hadn't before, and you're absolutely right. I wouldn't even begin to ask the question why, because the question why can be answered by the fact that we've moved away from God, but and it kind of went this way. But now it's almost laughable because there's no substance to this. There's no, when you started talking about it earlier, again, we're gonna desensitize them, and then since nature abhors a vacuum, we're gonna fill it full of whatever we emote that day. I mean, it's insane. Actually, it's absolutely and it's garbage. Right. It's absolute garbage. So the reason we had the dive signal was that's our promise to you guys to talk about solutions, because first of all, and Bug, you did an amazing job of outlining the problem very well. I can't think of too many guys who'd come on here with your experience who could really sort of articulate that position better. So well done. What do we do? Yeah, I think you hit on part of it earlier. The first thing you do is guard your TV. It's used as a babysitter.
There's a great priest that he was my pastor for just a few months at a parish that I was attending, and he used to be fond of saying, "Look, your TV's broken. Okay, it's time that you fix it. A 12 gauge will do the trick."
That sounds like fun. We could do that in your backyard.
So look, there's two problems, and they both are going to require different solutions. Right? The problem is, one, if you are a parent, you don't want this problem that we've just presented influencing your children, right? So there's problem number one. The other one is the failure to launch, right? The perpetual adolescence of young men in our society because of the cheap pleasure of entertainment, or at least in large part because of that cheap pleasure. If you are in that category and you accept this as truth, then there are pretty easy solutions for you. So let's start with that guy. Let's start with the guy at home that's like, man, I have a call to be great. I want greatness. I want to be a great man. I want to be a saint. I want to be the hero in a story, right?
Wow.
That we're all called to that. We're all called to greatness, and we shouldn't shy away from that. We shouldn't be ashamed of saying, I want to be a great man. By the time I'm drawing my last breath, I want people to be able to look at my life and say, that was a life well lived.
Yes.
Why on earth should we be ashamed of wanting what is truly good, what is the highest good, right? So step one is you have to accept that, because there's a lot of people, by the way, with as much, I think, credibility that I have to speak to this issue, I get far more pushback on this issue than almost any other issue.
Really?
People say, oh yeah, the big one I get is, well, aren't we supposed to evangelize every corner of the universe? And why would you leave Hollywood when now that you've converted, you could be doing more good there? And movies are good, and why aren't we watching the ones that are at least kind of good? And we can ignore the bad things in them because we're grown-ups and we have reason. Okay, stop. If that is your perspective, if you genuinely just don't buy it, we're talking to the wrong group, right? Like that. If you want to stay attached to your TV, have at it. I can't do anything for you. But if you're the other guy, here's what you do: turn it off. That seems way too oversimplified, but the reality is, we all need to purge first. You might get to have your TV back, right? But you got to purge first, because you're not in any state to recognize what is the good application of eutrapelia in regards to ingesting media. You're just not. I wasn't, and I'm speaking to myself, right?
Sure.
I had no clue what was good for me, what wasn't good for me. It wasn't until I went and lived in the desert for 6 months, cut out all media, and just purged, that I then kind of came back and was able to sort of weigh things and go, and by the way, the things I thought were beautiful before that, I saw as repulsively ugly. And things that could not engage me, things that could not keep my attention, that I found to be a lower form of storytelling or movie making or whatever, suddenly was so beautiful to me, because my sensibilities needed to be purged. I needed to take a big step back and detox, right?
Yeah.
So step number one is you just have to detox. There's no easy way to do it. Cut it out, replace it with other things, right? What I did after my main purging was I watched a lot of documentaries that were really factual based, not the big budget documentaries, the ones that still are just meant to pull at your emotions and sway your opinions this way or that way. I'm talking about, like, the Discovery Channel, here's how an engine works type of things, right?
Yeah, right.
The ones that have no emotional bend to them whatsoever. Just good old 90s style History Channel, this and that, right? I replaced my addiction to media with a lot of that stuff, listening to a lot of sermons and good, trustworthy priests talking about various issues of virtue. There's replacements to those things. And then, by the way, getting out into the real world. I found myself wanting to do more things outside of media consumption. I surprisingly, this maybe surprises some people, I've always been more of an introvert. I can handle myself really well in public settings and in groups because it's my job and I've trained to do it.
Sure.
It wasn't really my comfort zone, though. If I could sit home by myself and binge, the new season of Stranger Things or whatever, I totally would. What I found was, as I purged that, I had a desire to go spend time with people. I had a desire to go be in situations with my fellow men, right?
To engage as opposed to be a passive observer.
Right. And all of a sudden, me and my close group of friends were out playing mini golf once every few days together, or just doing random things, whatever we could drum up in the city, because we all lived in Los Angeles, right?
Yeah.
I was always, I think, more engaged with the real world than a lot of people. I was always a big camper and, things like that. But, so that's step number one.
But by the way, that's not a small point. So as opposed to purging on media and then replacing it with actually things that are constructive, get outside.
Right.
Like you were saying, whether it's mini golf or camping, it really struck me. What an excellent idea. Getting out in nature. And you lived in the desert for 6 months by yourself in a tent. And I think that
We
was
didn't have a tent.
you didn't have a tent
I slept on a cot
in the middle of
the sky.
in the outside.
Yep.
Do you have a firearm for snakes? I just thrown it out there.
Yes, I did. I always kept a firearm, but yeah, I literally had a military style cot that I had set up. You got to remember, this is the Mojave Desert, right? So, other than the drastic change in temperature, you don't get much of a change as far as inclement weather.
It's not going to rain on you,
right? So I had a cot set up, and my car was parked there. In the early days, I'd go jump in my car if it got too cold or whatever, but. Yeah, I had my cot in the desert and a stack of books.
Wow, that's fantastic. And I'm assuming like you probably built a fire.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
yeah. I think that. Wow, is that cool, dude? I'm sorry, that's really cool. I love it because I actually did something slightly different.
It was a ton of fun. It sounds crazy to people. Even my friends at the time were like, "Oh, you've lost your mind. You know, what are you doing?" I gotta say, man, I had a ton of fun. I challenged myself, and I felt really competent. Right. I got to come away from there and go, okay, I can do just about anything. If I want to be free of these things, I can do it. Right. If I've done this, I can do something else. And ultimately, that's what men are longing for more than anything else. They want to be challenged. They want to recognize their own competency. And when the world tells them you are not competent, you can't be competent because your natural inclinations that maybe would have made you competent, those are actually bad, and you need to work against those, right? You don't need to be a strong person who can fight for themselves. You don't need to be a toxic masculine survivalist who can go 3 days in the woods without bringing any food with you. You don't need to be those things. You need to let yourself emote, let yourself be softer. And learn to share yourself. That's the real toughness, right? The real toughness of a man is learning to share yourself with others. Well, unfortunately, those men hate themselves, and what they end up sharing with others is true toxicity.
Right. And by the way, it's also leads to neuroticism.
It's resentment that they share. It's a self-hatred. And if you can't genuinely, if you are genuinely not something that is lovable, right? You are not going to be able to love anybody else.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if you heard me, but I would also say too, that this precise, the push that you're talking about to get men to emote and share yourself. And that's a real man and stuff. This is what's leading to neuroses, neurotic behavior. I mean, and then, so now all of a sudden the focus is everyday people. This is going on everywhere. Again, this is the solutions part of it. You could start also by waking up and understanding, are you one of these people that wakes up every day of your life going, what can I do to make my life easier, me happier and comfortable? Okay, if you're doing that, you're not heading towards greatness, right? Yeah. And you need to recognize that this has been shoved down your throat your entire life. And by the way, dude, who's kidding who? Okay, women don't respond to this nonsense. They say, yeah, they say, but they don't really. At the end of it, they don't respect this.
No, there is a large segment of the female population who would prefer that guy, but not in an ordered way.
No,
they prefer that guy because he's controllable.
That's right.
They
wind up hating him.
Those women, of course they hate him. Those women become the replacement for Big Sister, for the surrogate Oedipal mother of government, right?
Yes.
And then, by the way, those women become that towards their children if they choose to have children. And what they raise is dependent, effeminate men because they're helicopter mothers who contradict their husband in front of their children and teach their children by their actions that their father is a buffoon who shouldn't be trusted or listened to or is not any sign of authority, right? And so it's the whole upending of society and of the family. Getting back to solutions, okay, there's not a huge broad application of solutions, I think, for adults in this scenario. You just kind of have to purge, and then you'll feel your way back towards what the right application.
And that's a pretty big solution, actually.
Right?
So, yeah, I mean,
that's a big one. And by the way, stop watching if you're not going to purge completely. Stop watching anything, and I mean anything that has real evil in it. And what I mean by real evil is you can have a bad guy in a story. Let's say you've got an evil character that kills a nun, right? That's a bad guy.
Yes.
Now, obviously, in the making of that, or in the writing of that, no nun was harmed in the making of this. He's an evil character in a story committing an evil act. Now, to fulfill the good, the intrinsic good of the story, that character has to have a proper, natural, proportionate consequence to his evil to represent that as evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there are also real evils in movies, meaning a woman is required to disrobe in front of the entire set and her naked body presented to anyone with $4 for a Netflix subscription, right?
Great example.
I know there's a lot of people, I know a lot of Catholic men, even decent Catholic men, who will argue this until the cows come home. They'll say, well, it's about my own interior state. It's about me not being moved. It's not an occasion of sin for me. I can look away and close my eyes, and I have not been infringed on in any way.
Well, you're supporting it.
That's it. This is a real woman who had a grave evil that both she committed and the people who convinced or influenced her to commit. And you know what? I know we're in solutions, and I don't want to get too sidetracked, but I want to tell this story.
Sure.
Because this is the thing that still haunts me from my time in Hollywood. There was not one woman, not one young woman who did not have a total emotional meltdown when she was required to do a nude scene or a love scene. I saw it again and again and again and again and again.
Wow. I would never have guessed that.
Every single time. Now, the only exception being the ones who had already done it so many times that they were desensitized. But I very often worked with women who this project was either their first big project or early on in their career. And unfortunately, God forgive me, I did a lot of movies that had very scandalous, horrible, grave evils in regards to a carnal nature.
Sure.
And the producers would pull her aside and spend an hour trying to convince her that she should put her emotions aside. This is going to be good for her career. And if that didn't work, then the mild threats would start. Well, this is technically part of your contract. This is what you signed up for. And then if that didn't work, they would send in me. I was the guy that they would send in as her partner in crime. Actors trust each other. Actors have to bond in order to work together. Every group of actors I ever worked with became like a small brotherhood for the month, 2, 3 that they were filming a movie. They would say, Bug, can you help us out here? And God forgive me, I would go in and I would comfort her and say, this is just a social construct. These things you're feeling are not real. Dry your eyes, think about the future. This is just a normal thing, right? I would go through all the talking points that I had heard a million times and that were told to me, by the way, early on when I didn't want to take my clothes off. Stop. This is not optional. Stop participating in that on all levels. Stop it. You will never grow in the spiritual life if you continue to participate in that. Period.
Well, could I say something?
Yeah.
That was incredibly powerful. I had no idea that story. Thank you for having the courage to own it, share it, and talk about your complicit acts in that. I'm absolutely stunned. I had no idea. I had no idea that most people during their first scene like this, because it's ubiquitous, these kinds of scenes are in every movie, their internal dialogue, call it natural laws, go, no, this is bad. This is bad. They have to be taught. They have to be coerced.
And here's what happens.
Wow.
Every single one of those women who went out to Hollywood with this, naivete, right? And there was still the purity of the small town in them, right? I mean, even if they were somewhat promiscuous comparatively in their small town, They were certainly not what Hollywood would consider promiscuous, right?
Sure.
Flash forward, I stayed in contact with all the people I worked with over the years. Flash forward to years down the line, every single one of them, without fail, was completely broken, had been abused and had a complete hatred for men, and didn't understand why they were miserable, and had no respect for themselves. The innocence that they came into Hollywood with was completely lost. And I know for a fact that it started with that first convincing, and then all the sprawling effects from that, right? So let's move on. Let's keep going on solutions, but that's a non-optional thing. You're not going to grow in the spiritual life if you continue to participate in that. So
right, great, very powerful story though. Thank you. So other solutions.
So let's talk about what parents can do for kids.
Sure. Okay.
And we'll work through the various applications, right? Because look, I get it. Being a parent is hard. Kids take a lot of your time, and sometimes it is nice to just have something you can occupy them with for an hour so that you can sit and talk to your wife, right? Like, I get it. We have been at this for a little while now, and we still, to a certain degree, rely on those sorts of things. The first thing we did, we got rid of our TV. It makes media just less accessible. It doesn't mean we didn't have any options for it. It just meant that it was very difficult to just have it streaming all the time, right? We would have to set up the computer, find something to watch and put it on. Or, me and my wife will still watch something occasionally, but we just sit and put it on our phones in front of us. We don't need the full movie theater effect in order to enjoy our time together, right? So I suffer the holding of the phone for, an hour and a half while we're watching something, and we just enjoy our time together. But the problem is, most homes, in America, at least, most homes have been designed in a way that the TV is the center point of the home.
Yes.
Right. That's what you've got to get rid of. You've got to get rid of, first and foremost, the idea that your home revolves around the TV. That should not be the center point of your living space, right? The center point of your living space should be the family. You shouldn't all be facing one direction towards this box that's just streaming data and emotions into your home.
In fact, that's reserved for God.
That's exactly right.
At Mass.
That's appropriate at Mass. We should all be facing
it is.
Along with the priest.
Yeah, that's cool. Go. Yeah.
But it's definitely not appropriate in the home. By the way, if you have a home altar, if you have a spot for your TV and it's all facing that, make that your home altar. Replace your TV.
That's great.
With a home altar that you can do your prayers together. You can kneel in front of and say your rosary. Like, that's a great way to replace that. So I do personally believe that everyone should be at least working towards removing as much of media as they can. I don't think there's any good that cannot be obtained through other means, right? Whatever educational good, there are other and better means for that. But you got to work there. We're still working there. So I'm not over here banging the gong for anyone saying, I'm the model of this or whatever.
Sure.
We're not even where we want to be.
We always make that point in anything we say. This is the center of the target. Life's messy. All these things. Right. Go.
Man, none of us are
no.
As virtuous as our forefathers were. And so parenting is even harder for us, right? I mean, it is an arduous journey to be able to really engage with your kids on a personal level. Look, what happens when you pull media out is you naturally start playing more with your kids. You play games. Me and my kids play hide and seek multiple times a week. It's time to play hide and seek, and we just run around the house. The whole house is open to hide and seek, and we just play games. Or there's all kinds of things we do. Here's what I found interesting, though. And I'm not really ashamed to say this because I think it's reasonable. I didn't get any overwhelming pleasure from playing with my kids initially, right?
Sure.
It's not like they're engaging me on a high level. It's not like a robust conversation I would have with my friends or something that is intellectually stimulating or pleasurable, right? I did it because it was good. I did it because it was what was appropriate and just. I owed that to my children to
Mm.
engage with them and to participate with them and to teach them that they are human beings worthy of engagement and participation. But here's what's cool. Virtue is its own reward. After, a year of really, really engaging with my daughter, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, there's nothing actually that I would rather be doing now than spending time with them. I actually get a pleasure from it. I actually get it's its own reward. But the growing process there is long and hard, right? Like sitting down and playing dolls with your daughter is not going to be stimulating to you. And I think it's a wrong perspective. I think it's a little sneaky lie that the culture has kind of put forth, is that it should be. And if it's not, something's wrong with you.
Right.
And that causes people to give up. It causes people to go, well, something must be wrong with me because I don't really enjoy this. Well, of course you don't. If you enjoyed it, you'd be playing dolls by yourself.
I can't see that, Bug. I don't see you doing that.
No.
Another analogy is food. When you get the dopamine or whatever it is hit from eating crappy food, and then all of a sudden you decide to change all things about you to have a higher standard, you start eating better food. Well, initially it doesn't taste that great. After a while, your body craves it.
Yes,
like virtue. I think it's a really good analogy. Actually,
that's a perfect analogy. So don't worry about that lie. It's a lie. Just push through, literally for years, probably, until the real pleasure, the deep satisfaction of the act itself will suddenly just overwhelm you sometimes. I am genuinely overcome with joy so often playing with my kids. And I can't imagine being anywhere else. But it took years, man, because I was disordered. I was used to the stimulus coming at me and selfishly just sitting back and being stimulated. Stimulate me, TV. Come on.
Yeah. And that's permeated into everything we're discussing. Have food delivered, have easy stimulate me. It's like, what's the next thing we can get stimulated by?
Right. That's exactly right. So you got to stop believing that lie and push through, fight through. Now, with your kids, you've got to be really cautious about what they watch. This is an obvious one, and it's been talked about ad nauseum in at least traditional cultures. And the more traditionally minded segment of the culture. But it's not just, is there anything intrinsically evil in this? There's multiple levels that you really have to start watching. And if you can't aim for the highest good, you really got to work through these different levels as quickly as possible, because now is the formative years. So step one, no intrinsic evil, obviously. I don't think anyone we're talking to is likely to have that problem anyway. But secondarily is ideological evil, right? You've got to be able to spot the ideology, because kids absorb it whether you want them to or not. The reality is the ideology, it just permeates through them. It becomes part of their belief system, and it lays dormant until they're adults. It lays dormant until they're teenagers. It lays dormant in there. Now, that's not to say that if they watch one thing with slightly bad ideology, they're ruined forever. There have been a couple occasions where I thought something was okay. I remembered it from my past. I knew there was no intrinsic evil in it, and I put it on, and I'm watching it with my kids. And then about halfway through, I realized there are some ideological errors in this that are clearly bad for my kids. I didn't freak out and turn it off immediately and say, "Run away, children." We finished the movie, and then I told my wife, that one's off the list. That one never, ever gets played again, period. Right?
Yeah, okay, sure. Again, being engaged and understanding this, paying attention is half the battle. Can I throw one more solution into that you can discuss? Because you touched upon this, but I think it's worth underlining. Remember, getting outside, camping, doing all that stuff. And I know you have embraced this fully, but through all of this, there is, again, we're talking about entertainment and detoxing. Get outside and work, exercise, really a huge thing. It's so amazing in our culture that we have to go to a gym to achieve these sorts of things. Yet, I just think it's not a small point. I mean, we have a consistent vitamin D deficiency in this country. and they want you to take supplements when we got this thing up in the sky. I'm going, anyway, go ahead, man.
This is one of my favorite things, right? So I'm working through the soft pitch stuff right now, right? I'm getting people through the addictions.
Sure.
My kids, they do enjoy watching stuff. They much prefer to be outside working with me.
Yeah.
Not even playing.
Yes.
They would rather be outside working with me than watching something on TV.
Yes.
If they can come help dad, do the farm chores, build my workshop, whatever it is I'm working on, that's what they actually want to do. And we have purged through all the phases of the disordered watching stuff. My kids, do you know what they prefer now? The Sound of Music. That's what they want to watch, right? Mary Poppins.
Right. Sure.
My youngest daughter, sorry, not my youngest now, but my middle daughter, she sat and watched about 30 minutes of A Man for All Seasons with me. She's 2 years old. And she sat there and asked questions. She was genuinely engaged with the
great movie too. Oh, my Lord.
She wasn't tuned out, a 2-year-old. Because we've worked towards purging them of the disordered, the emotionalized movies, the things that are grabbing at their input all the time. Look, kids are not stupid. Kids can engage with actually ordered content if you have taken the time to purge them of the disordered content. It's hard, man. I'm not saying it's not hard, but it actually is doable. My kids would much prefer to be doing productive things. My daughter, she's 4. I got flack for this on Twitter, which I think is crazy, but my daughter gets up in the morning at 4 years old and makes breakfast. She gets up, she climbs up on the stove, she gets the eggs out. Sometimes she makes a little bit of a mess, but we let her because she turns the stove on, she makes the breakfast, and she's so excited. There's eggshells in it. It's, she's no chef, but
I love it.
But the reality is she's a capable little girl. And that is where real confidence comes from, right? Instead of self-esteem, modern self-esteem, which is
huge distinction.
It's a hatred for self, right?
Absolutely.
All self-esteem that's built on nothing. Confidence is built on capability.
That's right. Self-esteem is a byproduct of virtue. It's not a destination. It's ridiculous, actually, because again, these pinhead sociologists discovered, they don't have very high self-esteem, so let's give it to them. They missed the point.
No, they missed the point. So then the last thing is exactly what you were talking about, right? As you're rolling back this addiction in your family, you eventually get to the point where you're just outside a lot. I mean, I'm personally outside in the summertime, 10 hours a day working. My daughters are out there 5-6 hours a day with me working. We stop and we tell stories along the way. They ask me, Daddy, can you tell us about Jesus? And I'll tell them some portion of the gospel. What part do you want to tell? Oh, can you tell us the way to the cross? And we're just together. We're just in the world, disconnected from all the escapism, disconnected from all the nonsense, and just being together, engaging on a real level with reality, right?
Sure.
And that's the goal, right? The goal is how can you remove as much of the non-reality as you can and replace it with reality? That's what you're trying to do.
Well, I think we're going to leave it here, sir, if I may. And I just want to tell you, honestly, I couldn't think of a better guy to discuss this issue. I mean, given your experience, your insight was tremendous. I'm not trying to be effusive. Thank you. It was great. So on that note, Mr. Hall, we will be we'll say goodbye. This is the 12th station, as in the 12th station of the cross. Thanks so much for tuning in and considering what we're saying here. And as always, if you disagree with us, be civil about it. Get in touch with us. We'll talk to you. Don't have to give us bad comments. Anyway,
remember to pray much and suffer well.
Well said. And Viva Christi Rey, guys. God bless. Till next time.